Greetings, everyone. Frogman here. I was asked to get some feedback on some photos by Radio on Tumblr, and they've just started their photography journey, at least with a interchangeable lens camera. They got a fancy Nikon D600, which is a great DSLR, and they seem to gravitate towards landscape, cityscapes, and so this feedback is going to be focused on that kind of photography. So we've got 3 photos here. We've got this one, and we've got this one, and we've got this one. So I'm going to first give my feedback on the photos, and then they mentioned that they haven't really started any kind of post-processing. They're a little intimidated by it, so I'm going to show some basic adjustments, and then maybe a few intermediate adjustments as well, just to show what the potential of editing your photos can bring. So first, my feedback on the photos themselves. I guess the story here is they were going to a sports ball event and took these photos on the way there and the way back. And the problem there is light. Landscapes, cityscapes, the way you almost always elevate them, make them special, is by planning and finding the good light. Good light is typically sunrise, sunset, nighttime. Nighttime you get all the lights, and you can get car trails with the lights of those. You can get cool lights reflecting in the water, and then sunrise and sunset you can get interesting skies. Exception to that might be like a stormy day with some intense clouds, things like that. So unfortunately, these photos, they're fine. I like the composition. I like in this one, I like that you had the little boat. I think you were trying to add some foreground elements and that's a trick to help give a sense of depth in landscape photography. I'm not sure this little light post, I'm not sure that really did much. I probably would even Photoshop that out afterwards. But I like the intention there, trying to get something in the foreground to give that sense of depth. That's always a good trick, but you don't always need it. If you've got a really interesting skyline like this city here, you don't necessarily need a foreground element to help with things. And you got this little boat here, and that's adding interest. And I like that it's over here and not in the center to distract from the building. So your eye kind of goes to the boat, up to the coal bridge, and then across the city skyline. And you have a natural direction to travel when looking at this photo. And that kind of keeps you into the photo. And so the only thing distracting you, I think, is this little light pole. But yeah, the light is what makes this photo suffer a little bit. It's just not very interesting light. Everything's kind of flat and dull. And I definitely don't want to discourage you from taking pictures on the way to things or whenever you can. Get that experience, absolutely. And then use them for practice with editing, especially because you've got this photo with bland lighting, and we're going to edit it later, and hopefully we can kind of bring it back into something a little more special. And then, so we got the second photo here. You again try to frame it, and I think this worked a little better, although I don't feel like the buildings are the hero in the shot. I think the foliage kind of, it's too much, so I might actually suggest just letting the foliage be at the very edges, and then by cropping in, now the buildings are more the hero of the shot. So I think that might be an adjustment you would consider making with that photo. And then this is your best photo of the 3. And again, it's because the lighting is interesting. It's blue hour, I guess just after sunset. And you've got the lights. You've got them reflecting in the water here. You've got them on the buildings. And so the only thing that detracts in this photo is the exposure is a little bright, which if you're going to edit the photo, that's a good thing. But if you're just going to take the photo and publish it without any editing, then I would have actually underexposed this a little bit just so it feels more like nighttime. And we're going to do something with editing to correct that, or not correct that, but change that. And I do like, again, that you're trying to include foreground elements, but I actually think these tables were fine for that purpose. I'm not sure the railing was necessary. Again, I like the thinking, and that's something that you're going to gain with experience, what works and what doesn't. So I don't want to discourage you from trying things like this. But I think what we're going to have to do later in editing and just tone down this railing, because it's just so bright that your eye just kind of darts right down to there. And again, we could even just crop it out and do kind of like a wide panoramic looking photo too. So yeah, this is definitely your best, and I think you can even tell, like, finding that good light for these types of photos is what really elevates them. So editing. Let's go over the basic tools. First of all, I'm using Lightroom, but you can try free raw editors. There's Darktable, which is originally for Linux, but now I think it's on everything. It's very popular with Linux folks. And then there's Raw Therapy, which I think is another free one. If you can't stand Adobe and just can't bring yourself to do Adobe, then the next best professional software for raw editing would be Capture One, which is wonderful software. It's just, one, it doesn't have the organizational features that Lightroom does. Lightroom is not just a raw editor. It is basically an advanced database for your photos, where you can find what you need at any time. Has a rating system, all kinds of ways to organize your photos to make sure that you can keep track of them, and it allows you to edit them as well and export them. And it's just, and then the combination of Lightroom and Photoshop, the $10 photography program, is just so powerful. And then the biggest advantage, I think, of Lightroom and Photoshop is just the knowledge base available. If you need to learn how to do something, you're going to have 20 tutorials to choose from. And if you're using other software, it's going to be a bit more of a struggle. So it's not that you can't use other software. It's just, it's going to make the learning curve and the learning journey a little more difficult. And if that's something you're willing to put up with, then, more power to you. But I've unfortunately got 20 years invested in learning this particular brand of software, so I'm kind of stuck. But if someone asks me what's the best software to edit your photos, I'm going to say Lightroom and Photoshop, a combination of the two. So just to clarify, Raw Editor is not necessarily just for raw photos. It's a non-destructive photo editing software, meaning it only changes data in the metadata. It doesn't change the actual pixels, it just changes what the metadata says. So anything can be undone at any time. And that's really the biggest advantage. And then Photoshop is a destructive workflow. There are ways to work less destructively. Some people say non-destructively. It's less destructively. But the ability to undo things, like if you do 60 steps and you need to undo step 40, it's very simple. You just undo a slider in Lightroom, whereas Photoshop, it's a little more complicated. So I say it's less destructive. Or Photoshop can be very destructive if you choose to work that way. So I'm just going to show you some basic adjustments and then a few more advanced ones. Let's go through the interface really quick. Up here, this is your main panel, and it's going to have all of these. You've got your basic tone curve, which I don't use, color mixer, color grading, detail, lens correction, transform, lens blur, yeah, all these things. And then your next section is your crop tool, and this pretty self-explanatory. You can choose here different very popular crops. You can also take this little ruler tool, draw it across your horizon and get your horizon straight. And so that is your crop tool. Next is your healing tools. I don't use Lightroom for this, but you can, like if we wanted to get rid of that lamppost, we could yeah, so that's something you can do with this. And then just added a generative remove tool. Oh, it's going right now. I didn't even know I asked it to do that, but and it did a bad job. So so we're going to undo that. So yeah, this is your healing section. Next is the red eye tool, which I feel like they have to leave in just in case there's people who would complain, but I guess there's still some people that have to deal with red eye problems if they use direct flash, but not a very often used tool. And then lastly, and this is the most powerful and hardest to learn section of Lightroom, these are your masking tools. They've got some automated ones here, like if you just want to select your sky and edit it or just the background. The main one I'm going to be showing you today is the linear gradient, and that is a very powerful masking tool for landscapes and cityscapes. So that's a tour of Lightroom. And then up here is your histogram. You need to learn how to read a histogram. Basically, you've got your bright stuff on the right side, dark stuff on the left side, and these little hills are your data, the data that's in the photo. And if you overexpose, then your data is going to be all to the right. If you underexpose, it's going to be all to the left. And a proper exposure, the most ideal exposure most of the time is when you have the data in between. So you don't quite have it all the way to the right, you don't have it all the way to the left. And, you know, there are some scenes that have so much dynamic range that you have to make a sacrifice, and you have to either lose data in the darks or lose data in the brights, and you have to choose which is more important to you. Is the highlight detail more important to you? Then you want to make sure that none of the data goes past the right. Is the shadow detail most important to you? Then you have to expose your picture to make sure that none of the data goes past the left here. And that's something you can check on your camera. Almost every camera has a histogram you can look at after you take your photo. And so learning how histogram works and how to use it to your advantage is very helpful, much more so than you know, what aperture to use and what shutter speed and ISO. And your histogram is your guide to making sure you get a good exposure, or the exposure you want. So let's get into it. First section is our white balance. Now, if you're shooting RAW, you can change your white balance after the fact. JPEG, you can affect the white balance, but it is much more severe, less natural adjustment with a JPEG. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but a RAW editor can edit any photo, and it can edit any photo non-destructively. A RAW photo is by nature meant to be edited, where a JPEG less so. It can be edited, but RAW photos, they have a lot more data that you can push around and adjust, and again, you can choose your white balance at any time, which is a huge advantage. But we've got this little white balance picker tool that we can find something that is neutral, and we can hit that, and it'll give us some kind of, I don't think that was accurate. If this was a RAW photo, that would have worked. So with a JPEG, you kind of have to hunt around for something that works like that. There we go. For JPEGs, I'm more concerned with the tint, the temperature. I can just adjust with my eyeballs. And then I like to start with a good white balance, and then I will adjust it to taste. Like if I want it to warm it up to feel more like a warm sunny day, or if I want to cool it down to make it feel like winter, then that's what I'll use, the temperature. The tint is a little more finicky, and better to use the tool to figure that out than just eyeballing it. And then we're in the tone section. Exposure, this is where you can fix if you overexpose or underexpose. You can bring this down or up. And this number here is stops. So this is 1 stop of exposure, 2 stops of exposure. So twice the light, 4 times the light. Contrast, I don't actually use much. Some people love this contrast slider, but and this is the first one they'll go to, and but I feel there are much more natural ways to get contrast, and I'll show you that in a second. Highlights, this is actually more of a recovery slider. So if you overexposed a little bit and you shot in RAW especially, you can recover the highlights by dragging this to the left. And then shadows, that's another recovery slider. If you underexposed, you can bring up the shadows by pulling this to the right and recover that detail. A lot of times, RAW photos, especially with a DSLR, you've got almost 14 stops of dynamic range, which means like in an 8-stop JPEG, you've still got 4 stops above and below that you can probably recover. So that is a lot of information that, it's really hard to screw up a RAW photo. You can usually salvage it even if you really mess up the exposure. So that's one advantage. Whites and blacks, this is what I feel actually gives a more natural contrast, and it only affects the last like 10% of your photo. But that's really, and usually the goal with your histogram is you want something just barely touching the right and something just barely touching the left, and that's generally going to be a good contrasty photo that's not too bright, not too dark. The presence sliders, you've got texture, which is a much more organic way to sharpen your photos, and it really brings in detail really well, and it doesn't give you those awful sharpening artifacts from a sharpening filter. Clarity is texture with contrast added in. So it's going to give you a sharpening effect, but it's also going to crush the blacks and enhance the highlights at the same time. So it gives you that sharpening effect and contrast at the same time. It's actually a very powerful tool and much more natural than the actual contrast slider. So that's clarity. And then dehaze is great for landscapes. When you have a photo that has something very off in the distance, there's atmosphere, and that atmosphere will reduce contrast on things off in the distance. And so when you want to fix that, you can go to the dehaze slider, and you'll see those buildings way far in the back, their contrast comes back. So dehaze is a very powerful tool for landscapes, cityscapes especially. Vibrance is a kind of saturation slider, but it's much more subtle. It doesn't bring back color in a very toxic or radioactive way like the actual saturation slider. So I would always go to this one first before I go to the saturation. And you'll notice these adjustments kind of go in order. While I think contrast is the very last thing you should do in your photo, just to see if it helps, almost all of these are kind of in a very natural order to adjust them. Although I, like for white balance, I get the proper white balance first, and then at the very end, when I'm finished editing my photo, then I'll do contrast to see if that helps. And then I'll warm it up or cool it off with the final adjustment to the white balance. But you always want to start with proper white balance. And then at the end, you choose an artistic white balance. So that's the basic panel. Let's see what we can do with it real quick. First thing I do is I go to the exposure slider, and I see what details are in the photo that I can't see. So I'll bring it to the left, and I'll notice, oh, there's a blue sky in there. There's detail in this clouds. Wow, we're going to have to bring that back somehow. And then I will bring it back this way, and then, is there any shadow detail? Not really in this photo. All the shadow detail is good. But if something was really dark and we couldn't see it, we'd pull this to the right, and then oh, that's there. And that lets you know, hey, I need to bring that back somehow. Okay, so we know we need to bring back some detail in the sky. So first thing we can do is just recover the highlights all the way. So that did a little bit. We're starting to get that cloud detail back. And then we know the dehaze slider also does that. So we're going to move that over. Oh, look, blue sky, cloud detail. That dehaze, that's a cool slider. Shadow detail, do we need any shadow? Well, we can try it. What I like to do is I will rock the slider, and it gives me a very quick before and after, and then I will move it past where I want, and then I'll bring it back a little bit. So, and that, like, overdo the adjustment and then bring it back. And I actually think, it kind of brings back the bottom of these trees, and that's fine. I don't think this really benefits much, but it doesn't hurt anything either. And then the whites and the blacks, this is where our contrast is going to come from. So you're going to want to watch the histogram here, and I'm going to push the whites just so they, in this little triangle, it's going to turn a color. And actually, you can hover your mouse over or click on the triangle, and it'll tell you when you're blowing out details. So that's way too far. And I can bring it back just so we're at the very edge. And then we can actually do that with the black slider too. So we're going to push the blacks. We're losing detail here. So that's about where we want the blacks. And then let's look at the difference we've made just with those adjustments. And then do we want vibrance, maybe to bring up that yellow bridge a little bit? Sure. And now we've got some really good contrast. I think the photo might need to be a little brighter, so we're going to bring up the exposure a bit. And so we did that, just the basic panel, just those sliders. If that's all you want to do, that's fine. But I think that just doing these adjustments, I think that can really elevate your photography. And by design, raw files are a little flat, a little lacking in contrast. So they do usually need a little bit of editing just by their nature. Oh, and then the contrast slider. Do we need? No, I think the contrast is fine. Don't like the contrast slider. Jared Pullen of Fronotes Photo, he just, every single photo, that's what he does. Just a different style, I guess. Okay, so we got some other panels down here. The only one I want to really bring attention to, actually first, lens corrections. If you're shooting raw, always check these two boxes in lens corrections. Your lens has, every lens has flaws, and those flaws can almost always be corrected through software, and then you just click these two buttons, and then those flaws are gone. Just a real easy thing you can do with every photo. And then we're going to look at the color mixer too, because I think this is a really simple adjustment you can make, and all it involves is you've got luminance, saturation, and hue, and we're just going to worry about luminance and saturation right now. Hue is only if you think a color just is really wrong, you can correct it, but we're going to worry about luminance, then saturation. So luminance makes a color brighter or darker, and you can individuate colors here. So I just rock the sliders and see if it helps anything. And it looks like we're affecting this building and this building right here. I don't really think it does anything negative or positive for the photo, so I'm going to leave that alone. Orange. Oh, this building right here, I like what it's doing there. So I'm going to elevate the orange here. Yellow, we're going to affect that bridge there. And actually, that really makes that bridge pop. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. Green, that's going to be the trees. Yeah, that helps a little. And then blue, for landscapes especially, the blue luminance slider is actually kind of powerful because you can really bring out the blue in the sky. When you drop the blue, you get some crazy blues in the sky. So we're going to drop the blue a little bit. Purple and magenta I almost never use because there just isn't a lot of purple and magenta in the world, and that's kind of sad, but it's just the truth. And then the saturation we can play with and just rock and see if, does it help? Does it hurt? Doesn't seem to do either for most of these. Do I want the bridge to be even more yellow? Not really. I think the luminance on that was fine. Do I want the trees to be a little brighter? Yeah, okay. And then with the sky, is the blue a little too much? Maybe just leave that alone. I think the luminance adjustment was fine. So I got it before and after. And just a reminder that JPEGs, like, they kind of force your adjustments to be a little much. This would be a lot more organic and natural looking with a raw file. But for demonstration purposes, this is what I had. So, yeah. So just with the basic panel and the color mixer, let's see what we've accomplished. And then I do want to show in the masking section the linear gradient. This is another tool that's very powerful. And the way it works is you pull in a direction, and this area down here you get the full adjustment. This area here you get a little less of the adjustment, a little less still. And the further these two boxes are, the more gradual the adjustment is. Whereas if you give it, this will be a very sharp transition from adjustment to not adjustment. So I want to affect just the water in this photo because I think the water is a little too detailed and it's drawing my attention a little bit too much. So I'm actually going to do negative clarity and negative texture on the water. And I think I'm also going to drop the exposure just a tiny bit. And we can look at the before and after. And I just think it makes the city skyline the star of the photo and takes a little less attention away from the water. So before and after. Although I don't really want to affect the boat. So how do I undo this adjustment for just the boat? Well, you can go up to this little subtract button here and then choose objects, or you could choose a brush, but objects is probably going to work better in this case. And just kind of paint a little red section over just the boat. And now the boat is unaffected by our linear gradient. And so that before, after, and I think that's about it for this photo. Moving on, and then one thing we can do that I'll show you real quick. If we choose the little copy button down here, I keep all my I'm using a very small laptop, so I keep all my panels closed. You don't have to do that if you have a bigger screen. So you do have, this is what Lightroom normally looks like, and we can choose the copy button here. And then we can go to this photo here and hit paste, and that just brings all of our adjustments back into this photo. So we don't have to And then we might have to go back and do some small changes, but they're relatively similar photos taken at the same time and the same lighting. And then we were gonna crop this, and I think for an after, I think that's a nice adjustment. And then we're gonna work on this one, and I think again, this is the best photo of the bunch, and the only major criticism I have on this is I don't think it looks enough like nighttime, and so I think that's what we're going to try to instill in this, is bringing back that sense of night. So how do we do that? Well, first, I think we're going to bring down the exposure. Now, if you were taking this photo and you weren't planning on editing, you could just drop your exposure compensation down a stop, and then you'd get this, and I think you'd get a much better sense of nighttime. It's okay if your photos are dark. Like, if they're meant to be dark, they can be dark. But it would be nice if we could get that sense of darkness without losing the exposure, like on the bridge and the lights in the city. And so that's what we're going to try to accomplish with editing. So white balance, do we need to warm it up maybe a little bit? I think that brings out the yellow on the bridge, so I'm going to warm it up a little bit. Tint, maybe a little positive tint. Trying to eyeball white balance is not fun, but that's what you have to do with JPEGs, because the stupid dropper does not work well usually. RAWs, this dropper is amazing when you just hit it on this little bridge here, and actually that worked okay, but it still needs to be a little warmer. Okay, so we dropped our exposure. I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit, I'm sorry. So we really want to bring out the lights, so we're going to do positive on the highlights. Shadows, do we need to bring out the shadow? I think no, I think the shadows are fine. And then the whites, we definitely want to bring out the whites so these lights really pop. But again, we're going to bring back the sky when we do the whites, so maybe we can counteract that a little bit with the blacks. Not much. Clarity is great for lights. That really makes lights pop. And then we can also do texture to bring out the buildings and stuff. Vibrance, do we need any vibrance? Maybe a little bit for the bridge. Saturation's probably not going to... No. Okay, so we've got this so far. And we definitely got more of a sense of night, but this sky is just this crazy blue color, and it's still too bright. So sky is blue color, so we can go into our color mixer. We've got that luminance that it just affects the blues. So we can bring that down, and we're getting closer. Now it's a little too saturated, because when you lower the luminance of a color, it saturates it. So we can get rid of the blue saturation. And I think we're getting close. Much more of a sense of nighttime. And so we could stop here and call this finish. And I think this would be a good result, especially if this were a raw file. This would look great. But now we're going to go into a little more of an advanced edit in the masking mode. Now we can just choose the sky. And my problem with that is that creates halos. Like right here, you can see a halo. I don't know if Lightroom's ever going to get that figured out, automatic masking, but it just doesn't seem to work great for me, for skies at least. So we're going to do linear gradient, and we're going to bring it down over the sky, and we're going to try just affecting the blacks, and we're also going to try dehaze to get that sense of darkness. And I'm going to remove the saturation again. And it's affecting the top of the bridge, which I don't like. So I'm going to hit that subtract button again. I'm going to go ahead and choose the brush this time. And I'm just going to brush in the top of this bridge back. And I did not do a great job of that, but you get the idea. I'd be a lot more precise if I were doing this for a final edit. Okay, so before and after. Yeah, we got a much more darker sky. There's a lot of noise in the sky because of the stupid JPEG, and one thing we can do is noise reduction. Okay, and then the last thing we need to adjust is this railing is just too bright. It's all my attention is going straight down to that railing. So we're going to hit this big plus sign, new linear gradient. We're going to pull it up, cover that railing. We're going to bring down highlights all the way. I'm going to drop the exposure. I'm going to desaturate it. Show the blacks. We just want this thing, just want a hint of this railing. Like, we want to know it's there, but we don't want it to distract from the photo. And then, so before and after. And I think that's done. So before, after. Before, and it looks like daytime. After, looks a lot more like nighttime. And I did introduce a lot of noise up in the sky. This Lightroom actually has a very powerful noise correction in the detail tab, but it only works on RAW files. We can try the manual noise reduction, but yeah, it helped a little. But if this were the RAW file, that would be a much less chunky sky right now. But yeah, so that's some basic and some advanced techniques for photo editing. So we got the before and after for this one, and this one, and this one. And maybe those edits, I pushed them a little too far, more than most might have done, but just to kind of give you dramatic examples. And again, if they were RAW files, these would look 10-20% better than what I just did. So I hope that helped get over the intimidation of adjusting your files after the fact. And like I said, even if you just work in these adjustments here, in the tone section even, I think you can get your photos to another level with just these adjustments. As far as I know, the person who took these photos, they used the included Nikon RAW software. And unfortunately, it's kind of a inside joke among photographers that all of the included brand software is kind of garbage. So I definitely would suggest trying RAW Therapy, Darktable. I hear a lot of good things about. And if you want to commit to this hobby, as much as I hate Adobe as a company, the combination of Photoshop and Lightroom is so powerful, and there's so much out there to help you learn. So that would be my ultimate suggestion if you're really serious about your photography. And I do know this person who took these really likes panoramas, and so in Lightroom, you just hold the Command key and pick the photos you want in your panorama, and then you right-click, and then you go to Photo Merge, and then you've got Panorama right here, and it does it almost automatically for you. So if you are interested in using Lightroom, and I think Lightroom has a trial, so you can start with that. Okay, that about wraps it up. I hope this was helpful to Radio, and also anyone interested in this stuff. Keep taking photos. You're on a good path. The nighttime panoramas you shot before this were really cool, and I think these would have been really cool if you took them sunrise, sunset, or nighttime. And this last photo especially was really cool. This is a great scene. I don't think the railing worked this time, but I'm glad you tried it, and I hope you try things like that in the future. Experiment, try things, fail. That's how it works. Okay, take care, everyone.